Leafs lose this weekend. And it was ugly. It was just really ugly. It was one of the worst games that they've played all season long. Lifeless performance that solicited boos from the Leafs crowd, which I really like, man, because Leafs crowds can be pretty dead, pretty emotionless. Saturday night against the Canucks, I'm guessing that there were some Canucks fans in there, that they were talking a little bit of trash. This felt like it was supposed to be a layup win for the Leafs, which, as you know, with this core, when things are presented to them as, hey, this is going to be easy, they seem to say, oh, good, we don't really need to try then. We don't need to put the pedal to the metal. Oh, crap, we're down 2-0 to the Vancouver Canucks, who landed this afternoon and who played last night and who have won 2 of their last 10 games. And I think we're winless in their last 4 or 5. They're a dreadful team. They're mired in controversy. And the Leafs just came out flat, didn't have really even a moment in the game. They asked the players about the game and the effort and all the classic staples of a beat reporter in that spot. And I had mentioned on Leafs Talk that night, I was curious to hear what Craig Berube had to say because, for the most part, he has been pretty reserved when it comes to criticizing players publicly. In fact, he's been pretty reserved in terms of showing any of the accountability stuff that we were told was going to happen this season with any of his star players. Like William Nylander gets to play 2 minutes of the power play every night. He had a 4-minute shift and his coach didn't plaster him for it. His star players were coming off of a game in which the top line was minus 15 and he rolled them right back together for that night against the Vancouver Canucks. And I thought Austin Matthews was completely invisible, and yet it was like, no shakeup coming, whatever, no big deal. So after the game, they asked Chris Tanev about it, and he says, we got outworked. That's why we lost. Like, okay. Not good enough, he said. Berube said they were too flat, which, again, I wouldn't have minded a little bit more fire and brimstone from Berube in that media conference, but that didn't end up being the headline. The headline comes from Mitch Marner, who says this. Goes, on the effort level, quote, I liked it. I thought we played well. I really did. The last couple of games, we've been giving up plays to teams that aren't missing on them, end quote. Okay. Your line, again, a couple of nights ago was minus 15, and you just lost to a Canucks team that stinks on home ice and got booed by your fan base. And I've seen some people, because I took to Twitter about this and mentioned that I think that accountability culture matters more when it's pervasive amongst the players than it is amongst the coaching staff. Like, you can only preach it so much if you're the coaching staff of a team. I think that ultimately the players have to be bought in, and you need to see that from your best guys, that they hold themselves accountable and that they will do this. And I know that there's going to be some people who get defensive because they feel like Mitch Marner is unfairly portrayed or overly criticized, and that he has been excellent for the most part of the season, and blah, 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 go on down the line. That this is a conversation that's really hard to have without a bias. And I'll say to you, this is why I can't stand it. A big part of this season is supposed to be about not just Mitch Marner's play in the regular season, or more importantly, the playoffs, because I think we all agree we know who he is in the regular season. We know he dominates. But during that media day, what did I give him a ton of credit for? Do you guys remember? It was that I liked the way that he spoke. He sounded like a guy who had an offseason where he was maturing a little bit. And I put it out there. I asked people, I mentioned, hey, maybe him being out there with Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby and feeling like he was a real core piece of Team Canada and entering free agency, he was starting to kind of accept, you know what? There's some things about my maturity. I got to grow up a little bit. I got to be a little bit more serious in my approach. I got to be a little bit more thoughtful in my approach. And I gave him a ton of credit for it. I really did. I thought, damn, maybe this thing has changed. Maybe this guy has taken this step. I know that I didn't take a step really maturely like that. It didn't become more of, I would say, a man who took accountability for things until I was in my late 20s as well, maybe even early 30s. So for a guy who has been a hockey player his whole life, I don't blame him for being a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to emotional and mental maturity. Give a little bit of grace with that stuff. And so for him to step to the podium and say, in the face of the fans booing you, and a shutout loss to a crappy team on home ice on Hockey Night in Canada, that you liked the effort, is lame to me. And it's a scary marker. I'm sorry. I don't think that the guys in the dressing room are looking at Mitch Marner's quote and going like, oh my God, Mitch. No, I think they love Marner. I think that's pretty well documented, that Marner's teammates like him. They think he's a fun dude, keeps it light. He's enjoyable to be around. His teammates want to play with him. That's why Austin Matthews keeps going on the same line with him. It's not because he's being forced by the coaching staff. It's because he wants to play with Marner. So I don't think that this is like an internal locker room issue. What I do think it is a sign of someone that still doesn't know how to be accountable to things and who thinks that just being fine is good enough. And to me, that's like a trouble sign with any young adult. I say it to my producers all the time. I think I learned this lesson when I was a little kid, is if you own up to your mistakes, then you can move forward. You can move past them. It shows that you have personal growth. And so to be there, and I get it. Some of you are going to say I'm reading too much into this, and I think I would be if it was just a one-off, but this continuously happens with Mitch Marner. After playoff losses, he ends up with quotes like this. After bad regular season stretches, he ends up with quotes like this, where he's kind of self-satisfied. And it drives me crazy, and I really think it does not resonate well with Leaf fans that he believe that they're gods. It drives them nuts. Nobody wants to see a product like that and then hear back from the person that it was actually good and you didn't know what you were watching. So for Mitch Marner, I just think it's an easy fix, man. You just got to take accountability when you don't play well, and people are going to appreciate it. It's going to show some sign that, hey, maybe you're not satisfied with just being good or being in first place, that the only thing that's going to satiate you as a Stanley Cup is winning, and that in order to do that, it is going to take a bit of a mental shift for you. And I think anybody that doesn't understand that, frankly, is a little bit of a loser. Anyways, Kris Versteeg of the Clever app and two-time Stanley Cup champion. I made him sit on the line forever. I went longer on that than I thought I was going to. What's up, buddy? How we doing?
Why?
Why?
The team's in first place, and I have to come on after these two games.
Yeah, I know.
Why?
I don't know. I told you, you have impeccable timing. It's almost like whenever the Leafs perform poorly, I got to bring you on. I don't know how many wins you've come on after, but I think if we did the breakdown, you've been on after a loss 90% of the time.
The first place team.
Yeah, I know. It's
Team,
unbelievable.
and I'm coming on after their two worst games.
Yeah.
Why?
You said yes. I asked you. You could say no. You could say, hey, call me when they look great. I want to come on after a game where they look great. Next time, I'll try to do that.
And you're talking about the Vancouver fans. I was at the game Saturday. I actually had my buddy. He's a big cattle guy because Alberta beats the best, right? So I wanted to bring him out to a steakhouse in Toronto before the game to get some Ontario beef. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he wasn't satisfied.
He wasn't satisfied, eh? That's pretty harsh to that steakhouse you took him to.
Well, we can get into corn-fed versus barley-fed beef any day and what tastes better. But there was definitely Vancouver fans in that steakhouse getting going, rubbing it in the Leafs' face prior to the game. So that started early. I seen it firsthand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, though. Those games usually have a little bit of added stakes. The Saturday night game, I feel like more fans more real fans go to the Saturday night games. They get a little bit more boozed up knowing that there isn't work tomorrow. So you get, I think, a better reflection of the true nature of the fans, and they booed them off the ice at the end of the game. And I guess I'm going to start with that. So after the game, you had Mitch Marner say that he believed that he liked the effort and thought that they played really well. I guess do you have a problem with that?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, I heard your spiel about the start of it and the accountability, and you want players to have accountability. Mm-hmm. If the team was in a tough position in the standings, I would have, if they were in a wild card seat currently at the moment, mm-hmm. I'd have more problems with it. And obviously we've seen quotes like that from multiple players when they've been in tougher situations, whether it's the playoffs after losing and etc. But for me, with the team being where they're at, 2 games in January where they laid absolute eggs, I can see what he's probably trying to do is not sound the panic button, but what it does is obviously it infuriates fans and media like yourself and others. So Would you have liked to have seen him maybe handle it differently? Yes. Would you want them to all sound the panic button alarm at this moment with where they're at and how they've been playing with all the issues they've had? No. So I could probably get a glimpse into understanding why he didn't want to completely sound the alarm after 2 games and where they're at. And would you like them to always have more accountability? Yes. I mean, we've been asking for that for a while now. So, but I do understand probably why he went at it the way he did.
Okay, so I'm going to counter this because there's 2 things here. One is this actually makes it a bigger story than if he just says we weren't good enough tonight.
Yeah.
No one's needing him to sound the panic alarm. Like everyone understands they're in first place. That's why they do get some grace for performances like this. But when your entire offseason message was, well, it's going to be about accountability. We're bringing in a new coach. It's going to be about accountability. And we've got a new captain. It's going to be about accountability and the leadership structure. And this guy's a pending free agent. I don't need Mitch Marner to say, like, yeah, we stink and we're not good enough right now and blah, blah, blah. It's all bad. Because I don't think that any fan is reading it that way. And so whenever that's kind of presented of like the panic alarm, I'm like, yeah, okay. The panic alarm to me is actually more when you show patterns from your past, which are when you play poorly, you kind of slough it off and go like, oh, well, we're in first place. And for Leaf fans, there's this moment, and it just happens to coincide with Joe Thornton being in town too, which is we got to look at behind the scenes during 2020. The Amazon series gave us a look, and they lose to the Canadians, obviously, at the end of that year. And there's this famous scene where the leadership group is all standing around with Sheldon Keefe, and he's bringing up problems with the team. And Joe Thornton is kind of smirking, and he looks at him and he goes, relax, we're in first place. And people are like, now that is just famous because all the things that Keefe brought up were the reasons why they ended up losing in that series to Montreal. And so to me, it's like you have to be able to identify when you have the bad games and why you played poorly so that you can actually learn how to not do it moving forward in the future. And so it's like if he just says, hey, we stunk tonight, we're going to be better next game, this is like this game just disappears. This isn't anything.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment. That's like we said, it's been a bit of a pattern going back for how many years now. But the other pattern that I've seen in the last 2 games is how do you keep a line together when they're -5? Or how do you keep them going together into the next night? Where's the accountability from the coaching staff?
I agree.
As well? There's zero accountability. Why is the same PP being flown out there? Why are guys allowed to stay 2 minutes? Why are lines not changing? Why are detail? You know what I mean? So on the one goal, I think it was the Jordan Stahl tip goal. You know, you see Matthews, he's not really engaged in the tip, right? Like he's kind of turns the wrong way when there's a button hook in the corner, you know. So after that goal happens, I think it made it 2-2 at the end of the first period. You know, you could kind of see that line's not going. Why not change it up in the second period? You know, maybe give them a spark to get engaged in the details of the game. Why do you keep it they get scored on in the first shift of the game against Vancouver? Why is there no accountability there? And it doesn't mean you have to sit those guys, but why not even just change it up a little bit? And this is the problem we said when the players were out of the lineup, certain players got brought in the lineup, other players had to elevate, other guys' roles got elevated, but then the guys come back and it's like, all right, well, here it is. Let's just let them go out. So I have I have a little bit of a problem with how he said it, yes, because it's always been, but that to me isn't an issue because I don't know if it's going to change. The problem for me is the accountability on the play side when you're -5 and nothing changes, and then you get scored on the first shift of the next game and nothing changes. That to me is a problem.
See, I just think that they're intertwined. Like I was thinking,
they are intertwined. You're right. But to me, the big piece of it is if you're going to go out for 2 games, nothing's going to change. You're going to go into the interview with nothing changing, so it's stagnant. If you maybe sit a guy for, maybe you sit him for like a couple shifts, right? Then that changes the reflection of the interview at the end of the game. They're not even talking about the game. They're talking, why'd you sit 2 shifts? Or, you know what I mean? So the whole
your coach has told you with action that it isn't in fact good enough.
Yes. So that changes the questioning even of the interviewer at the end of the game. So, but if the accountability on the coaching side isn't going to influence the player, which also can influence how they're being asked questions, it's just back to what we've seen last year of why is things not changing when they should change throughout the lineup, especially in situations like this. Now, I'm not panicking about it, just like you're not panicking about it. They're in first place and they're doing great things, and they've been through a lot this year. Mm-hmm. But those are little pieces that worry me way more than what an interview is.
Yeah, I totally. And I don't want to misconstrue this. Like, I'm not upset at Marner because he said something that I think is a little dumb. Like, I just do. I just don't think that this is a smart approach. I don't think it's smart for anyone. Like, I've said this story a billion times, but I got in a fight once in high school, and this big outdoor ed teacher named Jeff Teasdale, he broke up the fight. And afterwards, the one kid in the fight looked at him and said, like, I'm sorry, T. And I was spewing all these excuses. I was like, he came at me, just being a mouth. And he let this guy, Dan, walk away. And he's like, looked at me. He's like, you know why you're here? You're still with me? And I was like, why? He's like, because he took accountability and you didn't. And so I think he gets it and you don't. And I was like, got it. And that stuck with me for forever, where I was like, damn, I'm thinking about that. With the accountability stuff, that drives me so crazy is I think this is connected in terms of they have their coach, their teacher, quote unquote, who is not showing them in practice the accountability stuff. Like, the power play has been dreadful all season. Like, it's 18th in the league. They've got 60+% of their salary cap tied up on that group when Morgan Riley's out there, and they can't even threaten, Like, they went 2 power plays there where they didn't even register a shot. They had 1 shot on 3 power plays on Saturday night. Like, it's just not good enough. And still, it's like the same guys. Nylander, I don't believe has a goal despite with the second power play unit all season long, and he still gets to go out there and try to feast on with the second power play unit. Doesn't end up happening.
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
That's what I mean. And so you've got them connected. It's like chicken and egg, though, where I'm like, wait, is Berube wanting to do it this way? Like, why isn't he being a bit sterner? Is he trying to gain their trust so that he can pull these levers later in the year? But, like, when you see the guys, it's like no one's asking you to panic. No one's asking you to just, like, completely dismiss the successes you've had. All they're asking for is to start to see signs that you are maturing and that accountability culture that you're trying to create is going to manifest in ways where you nip a game like that in the bud. Or when you get to the postseason, you're not going to see those same old problems kind of crop up and then afterwards be like, oh, well, the other team just played well. That's too bad. I guess it was out of our hands.
Yeah, and I mean, I look back to the Nylander, I think it was a 4.5-minute shift.
Insane.
And you go out there for 2 minutes on the power play, you're not skating, and I love Willie. I'm just saying, you're going out there. But 5-on-5, he's out there for another 2.5 minutes, right? It was at the end, and then he stays out for another 2.5 minutes, and he's not coming off. And then that is almost the starting of the trend of, why can this guy get away with a 4.5-minute shift? And then he can get away with, like you said, feasting on the second power play unit and then not be held accountable. So then all the other star players are like, probably, well, why can't we do this now? Or why can't we hang on for another 30 seconds after our power play hasn't been really getting much going? And then all of a sudden the puck comes out of the zone at a minute, and instead of getting off the ice, they regroup to try to re-enter. And then their second PP, the only way they can score is basically off the rush because they get 15 seconds. So the accountability of that, to me, is that was a problem. And then it just kind of leaks through. And once it keeps leaking through and you think you can get away with more, obviously give an inch, take a mile type of thing, those can create a little bit of problems. And going down the stretch, how are you going to turn that back the other way when you're going to want to sit them for something like that?
So the craziest thing to me at this point is that they still haven't decided to go to 2 power plays, especially given this, like, when those 5 guys have been together this season, the power play has been dreadful. When Austin Matthews was out of the lineup, it's the only time where the Leafs power play has succeeded. I don't think that this is an Austin Matthews issue, but I do think that, like, how many years have you and I been doing these shows? Like, this is like year 3, 4. Was there ever a time where we went an extended stretch where I didn't ask you, like, what's up with the power play? And we talk about Riley swapping him out with God knows what players, right? It's like OEL one year, TJ Brody another year. Like, try a different guy from the point who can walk the line, but who can also fire a shot and make a quick decision. Like, this has been over and over and over again. And so I guess I'm not as Like, do I think the power play looks...
Unlike this year, generally it's never reared its head in the regular season.
No, not to this extent.
In the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a big difference now is the power play. You have a team in first place. You can start to go to 2 units. You can start to see what works because you don't want it to rear its head in the playoffs. Because if your power play is just, again, throwing out 5 guys over and over again for 2 minutes, and you're not going to get these other guys feeling important coming down the stretch, and then you're getting into the first or second round, and they're now not important. That's the problem. But you're right. It's like we've never really had to talk about the power play too much regular season because they got it done. Unlike this year, but they've also never been in first place.
Mm-hmm. So here's a working theory I have on it. And I don't even think that too much of it is theory. Some of it's like fact-based, some of it's theory-based. So I've heard Kipper talk about this before, and this is, again, getting back to the theme of today, which is the accountability culture. That when we've discussed breaking up the 5 guys, right, that I've seen Kipper go, like, they're not taking them off the power play. Like, they're not taking the stars off the power play. They want to be on the top power play. That's the way the league works. The best guys get the first unit, and that's the way it's going to be moving forward. The only guy who's really ever had to sacrifice that is Morgan Riley, who I do think is an accountability guy and who I do think is approachable in the sense of the team can go to him and be like, hey, man, you've got your long-term contract. You are an assistant captain of the team. We're going to take a different look on the power play. He subs in, he subs out. It's just like the same old thing. It's either him or Nyes, whatever. But the other dudes, like the 4 forwards, they are not coming off that first unit. And when it comes to the accountability, I do wonder if the coaching staff feels like they are even going to... I know they're able to because ultimately they have the decision, but I wonder what the feeling is when they have to try to go to, say, like William Nylander, go, hey, we want you to run the second power play unit. He's going, wait, so now I have to not only play the full 2 minutes, I'm not out there for the first one. I wonder what they say if they're going to Matthews and being like, hey, you're not going to be on the first power play unit despite being the captain of the team. Marner, who's in a contract year. Like, it feels exceedingly difficult to envision a scenario where they're sitting down with those guys and going, you're the one that's off of the unit, or you're the 2 guys that are off of the unit, and we think this is best for the team, but that you're going to get real buy-in there. And again, that to me is a lack of accountability amongst the players who have struggled to this point and who I believe would likely point back to all those other regular seasons where they've been good and gone, well, we've usually done well, so just leave it. It'll figure itself out. Let's not try something new. Leave us out here.
Yeah, but Stanley Cup.
Yeah,
right?
that I agree.
Stanley Cup. That is the goal, number one. How many times have I talked about Patrick Kane, and every time he's won a Stanley Cup, was he 120 points or was he 80 points? He played on the first unit, but if the second unit was going with Marian Hossa, that unit would go. Mm-hmm. If, and did it piss Kaner off? Oh, I bet you it did piss him off. But guess what? It got him mad to show up when he got his 1 minute. Each unit gets 1 minute. They compete against each other. If you ever need all 5 guys on the ice because you need to do it, you go to all 5 guys. Mm-hmm. But if you go to those guys and you say the Stanley Cup is the goal, each guy gets 1 minute on the power play. If the puck comes out of the zone at 55 seconds and you regroup to go back in, and you want to hang on the puck for 30 more seconds, you are benched. Basically, that's the message. We need you guys to compete against each other for 1 minute each on the power play. The Stanley Cup's the ultimate goal. If we can get you guys together on the power play together at times, if you're feeling good, or at the end of the game, or certain times and moments, we will do that. But if you look back, Florida, 2 power play units. Guys go hard 55 seconds. When they need it, they load them up, right? So it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's just give these guys each a unit. Marner and Matthews, give them a unit. Or Marner and Nylander, give them a unit. Tavares and Nylander, Tavares and Marner, give them a unit. Let them go at it. Let them compete. And then also that brings in other guys. It brings in other guys' importance and gives them more puck touches. And if they're playing 14 minutes with power play time, Max Domi, it gives them more puck touches. It makes them more important. I can't see, though, you going into the room and telling the guys that and then saying no. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe the staff, maybe Savard's scared to do it. I don't know. Are you really that scared to go to 4 guys and say, this is how we're going to win a Stanley Cup. The East is junk.
Yeah.
The Eastern Conference is junk. I'm telling you. How many true Stanley Cup playoffs? I actually think the Leafs are the top team on both sides in the Eastern Conference. Who's better than them?
I still think Florida is, like, I'm giving them the nod. But after that, like, yeah, I don't think the Capitals are better than the Maple Leafs.
The Carolina Hurricanes, are they that much better than the Leafs? Really?
No, I think that they're a bad matchup for the Leafs, but I don't think that they're like a better team on the whole.
Here's the thing with the Carolina Hurricanes. They have to play 2 hard rounds, and the way they play it taxes their players way too much. Why do you see the Carolina Hurricanes dissipate generally as playoffs go on? They play an insanely hard style of defending, which taxes a player time and time again. You might catch them in the 3rd round when they're gassed, just like all these other teams generally do, 2nd or 3rd round. Like, the East is junk.
No, it's right there.
It is right there for you. Like, this is if there has ever been a year to go on a run, this is the year to do it. And I cannot see for the life of me, if you just told the guys, I can't see why they wouldn't. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I truly want to believe in those guys, and I truly want to believe that if you went to them as a man and you said, this is what it's going to take to win a Stanley Cup, if you're going to be pissed off at times because maybe the other unit's scoring more than you and they get the first nod to go out there, so be it. Then get pissed off and go score when you go out there.
Yeah, and again, this is something in the offseason that was discussed, was the idea of internal competition and accountability. And so, to me, this is just like actually such an important marker at this point. I think that the power play has been a little too back and forth in terms of the Nyes-Riley thing. Like, is it 5 forwards? Is it Riley in there? Like, it's felt a little herky-jerky at times to me, if I'm being, like, dead honest. But every time I look at it, I'm like, well, at this point, it seems pretty clear to me that you would go Matthews and Marner get 1 unit, Tavares and Nylander get another. And if you think that you need an extra puck carrier, then put Domi with that second group instead of the first one. But you could kind of put him with either because he's had success with Matthews in the past before. Like, make that unit more about trying to set up Austin Matthews. And yeah, have them compete. Show that there is the buy-in for them to make a sacrifice. Show that there is accountability from the coaching staff that will work on the players, and take a step to try and be different than in years past. I think it's at this point one of the most obvious things that I can remember that will inspire confidence in just about everyone. I think that the reasons why they don't do it at times are because, A, there probably is an underlying feeling that none of those guys want to make that sacrifice, which is fine because they're star players, but it does feel a little different when it's like, well, does any other team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup this season feel like it's that big of a deal for their stars to do this? I would say no, and so that tells me something that I'm a little uncomfortable with. And then 2 is that they're afraid of what you said there, which is, and why we use the words of like, why we always preface things, when we have conversations like, hey, nobody's panicking, nobody's doing this, nobody's doing that, because there's this kind of like underlying thing here in Toronto that any sort of criticism or any of this like accountability outwardly is viewed as panic, or that, the media won or that the fans won. And I feel like that is such backwards thinking, and that it's so overrated and overstated and misunderstood, and often just like such a straw man. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about whether the world thinks you're panicking, or if try to communicate to the players that you don't think this is a panic. Hey, we are in first place. This isn't about panic. It's what you said, that we're trying to win a Stanley Cup, and we think that this helps us in that direction. And so we're going to do it. Plain and simple. That's the messaging. Get it done.
Yeah. Just be direct and specific.
Yeah.
I mean, bring the guys in, be direct. And if they say no, then you have your answer on the entirety. But
yeah.
Just bring him in, like Savvy, man. I mean, he's the PP coach. Bring him in. Berube, bring him in and go over it. Say, this is how it's going to be. I don't know. It's not that hard. I agree. Can't see. I mean, we've been asking for this for how long? But
yeah, way too long.
Way too long. So, again, like you said, it's not panic. It's not this, but it is a good time to start to lay the groundwork for success because the East is junk. And they can really go on a run here.
Yeah, completely agree. So I should have left more time for this because, and we'll probably do this more, kind of keep it as a bit of a theme of our conversations. But I don't ask you enough kind of about youth hockey and development programs in this country? Because, like, yeah, you obviously run like a really big team. You wore your clever hat when you went up to present the sweater to the veteran. I was like, take your hat off. You're trying to show some respect, but I guess you're more about promotion than you are about showing respect to the troops. That's fine. That's not what I would have done, but that's, to each his own. You have this like highly successful program. I know it's especially personal to you because like your kids are involved in it. I know you have the app, but again, it's a bunch of teams too. So I am curious we've had all these conversations recently, like since Canada's junior team lost, about problems with our development and whether we're doing things the right way and where the issues are. And the things I keep getting back from people is like there's a lot of problems and a lot of rot when it comes to coaching. And then the most obvious one for us being that like the prices are insane. It's $400 for a hockey stick right now in this country. I had I've been soliciting from people, the price of playing in the GTHL and other leagues. It's like you're talking about almost $40,000 a year for a family, for kids to play in those leagues here in Toronto, which is just crazy, complete different world than the one that I grew up in. From your perspective right now, I guess, if you could sort of simplify it, what do you see as the biggest problem with the way that we're developing young players in this country right now?
Well, grabbing the best athletes is from the ground up. How are you attracting young hockey players, soccer players, whatever, at the entry level in order to fall in love with the sport and then give them a coaching staff and a roadmap and a runway in order for success from a young age? Everyone, you listen to the argue and then as it grows, how do they, come up through a good program that teaches them all the basics, the essentials, and also keeps it affordable for the kids that cannot afford it. You said it, affordability is the number one thing. I mean, everyone wants to complain about hockey. Hockey is the national sport in which they're complaining about hockey. I still like it because it means hockey means something. But if you look at any NSO, so any national sports organization body, and you look at the price for basketball, baseball, soccer, it's no different in any sport now. The price, the complaint people keep giving about hockey is equipment. And yes, if you go play into these leagues, especially once you get into U14, U15, U16, families are shelling out, crazy costs of money. Then you hear the complaint about the Canadian kids are all rich kids, yada yada. America is no different. The price of ice time is $500 US in a lot of these areas. The price of ice time across Ontario, probably the average cost of ice time is $250. Some places are upwards of $400 to $600 for an hour of ice, hour and a half of ice. So, and if you look at field time for soccer facilities, especially in the wintertime, it's $150 to $300 for field time. So you could go across any sport. The price is way too much. There's not enough government funding that helps offset costs for families in any sport. Equipment prices are insane. Like you said, $400 sticks. How is a family going to afford, if they break a stick after the 30-day warranty, another $400 stick with $1,200 skates? If you look at cleats, if you look at private training, whether it's hockey, basketball, baseball, whatever it may be, and again, those private trainers have to charge a certain cost because their bare minimum costs are exorbitant as well. So if you look at just the way the world's set up in North America with the capitalistic type of thing, but also how, whether it's inflation and everything going up, it is extremely hard on families. So if you recycle it back to the entry point, how are families entering the sport? Is it feasible for them? And then can they maintain that over time? And it is really hard whether you're in the Canada or the U.S. Just the thing the U.S. does a lot better than us is, first off, they have as many kids, if not more. There's a lot of kids that don't count towards their total, and same in Canada, because they're not Hockey USA or Hockey Canada registered. There's a lot of kids playing hockey. What the U.S. does really well is the way they put coaches in place, especially at a little bit of the older age groups. They put great coaches in place, and then it bleeds into that U.S. national development team. So that U.S. national development program helps offset costs I believe, for those kids. I think some pay, but in Canada, where we just break off and go into junior, right? And junior, obviously, not so much junior A, but the WHL, OHL, they pay for your stuff now. But the way the U.S. is really condensing the talent as it goes up the pyramid to get the best players to play from a young age, to get them together, to do proper skill development and training, and then get them into NCAA and so on, the U.S. has the money to do it. And they put the money into their programs, whatever it may be, swimming, hockey, baseball, basketball. They put the money into the programs to do it, where Canada just doesn't have that type of money to put into every program. So barrier to entry is always going to be an issue no matter what sport. How do you grab as many kids as you can that love whatever sport they do in order to enter that sport, and the families that need help, how do you get them help in order to maintain that sport for that child? And that's always going to be, it's been a problem. I remember, my parents couldn't afford it. My grandparents had to pay for me in order to play hockey, right? And it's only getting worse, and it's no matter what it is, whether it's groceries to sport. It's only getting worse, but how do you help families offset costs that especially need it, especially if their kid wants to go to be an elite athlete, AAA athlete, in whatever sport they do? How do programs come in to really help offset costs for these families? Because again, everyone wants to blame these organizations, but their cost is exorbitant as well, right? And the cost that they have to pay is crazy as well. So it's a problem across all sport, and you just hope that there's a way one day, especially in Canada, where they at the barrier to entry point, that you can get as many kids into whatever sport they want to play, and then help them come along. But everyone talks about the European model, all this. Well, the European model is their youth programs are owned by a pro program. So those kids can get in and they help get cost offset through that way, where there's nothing like this here because we just don't have any youth programs linking to a national program and or a pro program. So it's different, right? Where the U.S. now has it linking to a U.S. national development program. But yes, cost is always going to be an issue, and it's only going to get worse. Yeah.
Kris?
But again, I stress it's not just hockey.
Well, it is, though, because if you look at AAU basketball, that's $4,000 a year. US, but that's $4,000 a year. GTHL hockey, like I said, $40,000 a year. Like it's 10 times the cost.
That might be the odd area, but if you look at most minor hockey organizations, if it's between 4 and 5, and you're not even including in your AAU basketball all your private training sessions.
No, you're not, but I'm not including that number with private training sessions with hockey either, right? Like, and the equipment does matter. Like, again, same thing when I was a kid and I was a young goalie. It was like very much like you have to get a job and you need to buy secondhand equipment and you need to use the rinks gear for multiple years before you can kind of get this done. And it felt like a big challenge for my parents back then. And it was like a lot of community fundraising in terms of the ways that we were able to even, afford our trips to go play teams that were in Alberta and in BC and in Alaska. But like, my God, it's just, the idea of, you're getting your kid to fall in love with something that is going to potentially cost your family, upwards of $40,000 a year if they're successful at it by the time, they're turning 15 years old. Just, it's tough. And it is different. It's like the equipment and the time and those skill coaches, like just looking at the average prices here, like it's not the same. Hockey is more. Like it just... All these sports
hockey,
are up.
But like my kid plays elite, like he plays AAA, whatever soccer is.
Yep. They're all
soccer up. It's all up, and it's a problem across. Yes, you can always say the equipment side adds to the cost, which is correct.
Yeah.
But it's across all sports.
For sure.
And that for me is the bigger issue.
Yeah, I agree.
You want as many kids playing sports and being a part of a community and falling in love with it, whether they want to be a pro or they just want to do it to be in the community and have friends. So that to me is always going to be the issue across all sport is the cost. And it's hard.
Yeah, dude, I hate it. Like I said, all I want is for kids to be able to experience this stuff where they get to be kids, that not everything is about making the pros, and that you're doing it for the right reasons, and that it doesn't have to cost you an arm or a leg. We're up against it. We got to run. But as always, buddy, thanks for the time. We'll be talking to you soon.
Okay, we'll talk about Cameron and then World Juniors next year.
Okay, next year. All right, see you, buddy.
Yeah.
Kris Versteeg of Clever and two-time Stanley Cup champion.